The dust billowed across the barren plains of Arizona Territory as Naomi Reeves clutched her wailing 6-month-old daughter to her chest. The stagecoach that had abandoned her grew smaller on the horizon, leaving nothing but a trail of dust and betrayal in its wake. The year was 1879, and the promise of a new life with her husband in Tucson had vanished as quickly as the man himself. George had taken everything: their savings, their tickets, her dignity, leaving her with nothing but the clothes on her back and their infant daughter, Emma. "Hush now, little one," Naomi whispered, her voice cracking as she fought back her own tears. The relentless sun beat down upon them as she sought shelter beneath a scraggly mesquite tree. Emma's cries grew more desperate, her tiny face red and streaked with tears. Naomi's breasts ached. She hadn't eaten properly in days, and her milk was drying up. Death seemed inevitable out here, slow and cruel. She'd been a fool to trust George, to believe his promises of prosperity and happiness in the West. Now she would die for that mistake, and worse, her innocent child would die with her. The distant sound of hoofbeats barely registered through Emma's cries. Naomi didn't bother to look up, assuming it was just another mirage brought on by desperation and heat. It wasn't until a shadow fell across her that she realized someone had approached. "Madam," a deep voice spoke from above. "You all right?" Naomi looked up, squinting against the harsh sunlight. A tall figure sat atop a chestnut stallion, his face obscured by the wide brim of his hat. He dismounted in one fluid motion, and as he approached, she could see he was a cowboy, lean and weathered, with kind eyes that contrasted with his rugged appearance. "They left me," she said simply, her voice hollow. "The stagecoach driver and my husband. They left me here. Said I was slowing them down." The cowboy's jaw tightened as he knelt beside her, offering a canteen. "Here, drink this. Slowly now." Naomi took it with trembling hands, sipping the tepid water before trying to coax some into Emma's mouth. The baby continued to wail. "Name's Quentin James," the cowboy said. "I've got a ranch about 5 miles west of here." "Naomi Reeves," she replied. "And this is Emma." She looked down at her daughter, whose cries had subsided into pitiful whimpers. "I don't think she's going to make it." Quentin's gaze softened as he looked at the infant. He reached out with a calloused hand, gently touching Emma's feverish cheek. "They left her in the dust with her baby crying," he muttered, more to himself than to Naomi. Then he looked directly into Naomi's eyes. "You'll never cry alone again. Not if I have anything to say about it." Without further discussion, he helped Naomi to her feet and lifted her onto his horse. He mounted behind her, one arm securely around her waist, the other holding the reins. "Hold tight to your little one," he instructed. "Ranger here will get us home quick." As the horse set off at a steady pace, Naomi leaned back against the stranger's chest, too exhausted to question her trust in him. Anything was better than dying in the desert. Quentin's ranch appeared on the horizon just as the sun began to set. It wasn't grand, but to Naomi's desperate eyes, the modest house, barn, and corral looked like paradise. A wisp of smoke curled from the chimney, and several cattle grazed in a nearby pasture. "Rosita," Quentin called as they approached. An older Mexican woman emerged from the house, her eyes widening at the sight of Naomi and the baby. "Dios mío," she exclaimed, rushing forward as Quentin helped Naomi dismount. "Bring them inside, quickly." The next hours passed in a blur as Rosita tended to both Naomi and Emma. The housekeeper prepared a thin broth for Naomi and helped her bathe the feverish infant in cool water. By nightfall, Emma's fever had broken, and she was nursing weakly at Naomi's breast, which had begun to produce milk again after Naomi had been fed and hydrated. Quentin appeared in the doorway of the small bedroom where Rosita had settled them. "The little one looks better," he observed. "Thanks to you," Naomi said softly. "I don't know how to repay you." "No need for that," he replied, pushing his hat back on his head. "No decent man would leave a woman and child to die in the desert." "My husband did," she said bitterly. Quentin's expression darkened. "Then he's no man at all." He cleared his throat. "You're welcome to stay here until you get back on your feet. I've got plenty of room, and Rosita could use the company." "I couldn't impose. It's not imposing if I'm offering," he said firmly. "Get some rest, Mrs. Reeves. We can talk more tomorrow." As he turned to leave, Naomi called after him. "It's Miss," she said. We weren't actually married. He said we would be, once we reached Tucson. Quentin nodded, understanding dawning in his eyes. Good night, Miss Reeves. In the days that followed, Naomi slowly regained her strength. She insisted on helping around the ranch, learning to cook southwestern dishes from Rosita and tending to the vegetable garden behind the house. Emma thrived under their shared care, her cheeks growing rosy and her laughter filling the previously quiet home. Quentin, for his part, kept a respectful distance, though Naomi often caught him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. He was kind but reserved, sharing little about himself despite her curiosity. One evening, as they sat on the porch after Emma had been put to bed, Naomi finally asked, "How did you come to have this ranch, Mr. James?" Quentin looked out at the darkening landscape, his profile strong against the fading light. Fought for the Union in '65. I was just 17, lied about my age to enlist. When the war ended, I couldn't go back to Tennessee. Too many ghosts. He took a sip of coffee, came west, worked as a ranch hand for years, saved every penny. Bought this place 5 years ago when old man Thornton decided to head back east. And Rosita? A smile tugged at his lips. She came with the property, refused to leave, said she'd been here 30 years and wasn't about to start over somewhere else. Best decision I never made, keeping her on. Naomi laughed softly. She's quite formidable. That she is. He looked at her then, his eyes serious. What about you? Where were you headed before? Before I was abandoned? She sighed. I was a seamstress in St. Louis. My parents died of influenza 2 years ago. I met George at the shop where I worked. He was charming, well-dressed. Said he had business prospects in Tucson. She shook her head. When I found out I was expecting, he seemed happy, said we'd start a new life out west. I believed him. And now? Quentin asked quietly. Naomi looked down at her hands. Now I don't know. I have no money, no family, nothing to offer my daughter. You have time, he said. Stay here as long as you need. There's a small town about 15 miles south Willow Creek. They might need a seamstress. Hope flickered within her for the first time in months. You think so? Worth finding out. He stood, stretching his tall frame. I'll take you there next week, if you'd like. I would. Thank you, Mr. James. Quentin, he corrected her. Mr. James was my father. She smiled up at him. Quentin then. True to his word, Quentin took Naomi to Willow Creek the following week. The town was small but growing, with a general store, saloon, blacksmith, and a modest hotel. Quentin introduced her to several townsfolk, including Martha Wilson, who owned the general store with her husband. A seamstress? Martha exclaimed when Naomi mentioned her skills. Why, that's an answer to prayer. I've been sending all the way to Tucson for my alterations. You stay right here, dear, while I fetch Herbert. Within an hour, Naomi had secured arrangements to work from Quentin's ranch, taking in sewing from the townspeople. Martha would collect and deliver the garments during her regular supply runs, and Naomi would be paid fairly for her work. As they rode back to the ranch, Emma securely bundled against Naomi's chest. She felt tears of gratitude well in her eyes. Something wrong? Quentin asked, noticing her emotion. No, she said, wiping her eyes. Something right for once. I can't remember the last time someone showed me such kindness without expecting something in return. Quentin's gaze was steady. Not everyone in this world is like your George. I'm beginning to see that, she replied. Spring turned to summer, and Naomi established herself as Willow Creek's seamstress. Her reputation for fine work spread, bringing customers from neighboring settlements. She converted a small room off the kitchen into her workshop, where she could sew while keeping an eye on Emma, who was now crawling and exploring everything within reach. Quentin expanded his cattle herd and hired 2 young men from town to help with the ranch. The house grew livelier, with meals becoming a time of conversation and even laughter. Naomi noticed that Quentin smiled more often now, his reserve gradually melting away in the warmth of their evolving household. One July evening, as a violent thunderstorm raged outside, Emma woke screaming from the thunder. Naomi rushed to comfort her, but the baby was inconsolable. To her surprise, Quentin appeared at the bedroom door, concern etched on his face. May I? He asked, holding out his arms. Hesitantly, Naomi handed Emma to him. The baby immediately grabbed his shirt with her tiny fists as he began to pace the room, humming softly. To Naomi's astonishment, Emma's cries subsided, and she laid her head trustingly against Quentin's chest. "You're good with her," Naomi observed, watching them. "My sister had 4 little ones," he explained. "I helped with them when I could." A shadow crossed his face. "Before the war. Are they still in Tennessee?" He shook his head, his voice low so as not to disturb the now sleeping Emma. "Yellow fever took them in '73. I didn't find out until almost a year later." Naomi's heart ached for him. "I'm so sorry, Quentin. It was a long time ago." He carefully laid Emma back in her cradle. "We all carry our ghosts, I suppose." As he turned to leave, Naomi impulsively reached for his hand. "Thank you. For everything." His fingers closed around hers, warm and strong. "You don't have to keep thanking me, Naomi. I know. I want to." Their eyes met, and something shifted between them, an acknowledgement of feelings that had been growing steadily over the past months. But Quentin merely squeezed her hand gently before releasing it. "Good night," he said softly, and was gone. As summer waned, their routine continued, but with a new awareness humming beneath every interaction. Naomi caught Quentin watching her as she hung laundry in the yard, his expression thoughtful. She found herself noticing the strength in his hands as he worked with tools, the way the sun had deepened the crinkles around his eyes. Emma took her first steps in September, toddling precariously from Naomi to Quentin as they sat on a blanket in the shade of an oak tree. The baby's triumphant giggle as she collapsed into Quentin's waiting arms made both adults laugh with delight. "She's growing so fast," Quentin remarked, settling Emma on his knee. "Too fast," Naomi agreed. "Soon she'll be running everywhere." "She's going to be as beautiful as her mama," he said, then looked embarrassed at his own words. Naomi felt a blush rise to her cheeks. "Quentin, I shouldn't have said that," he began, but she shook her head. "It's fine. It's nice to hear." They were interrupted by Rosita calling them for dinner, the moment passing but not forgotten. That night, after Emma was asleep, Naomi found Quentin on the porch, staring up at the stars. She wrapped her shawl more tightly around her shoulders and joined him. "Rosita says there might be an early frost tonight," she commented. He agreed. "She can feel it in her bones, she says." They stood in comfortable silence for a while, shoulders almost touching. "I've been thinking," Quentin finally said, "about adding onto the house. A proper sewing room for you. Maybe another bedroom." Naomi's heart fluttered. "Are you planning to stay in Willow Creek long then?" "I wasn't planning to leave," he replied, turning to face her. "Are you?" She met his gaze steadily. "I have no reason to go anywhere. Emma and I have found a home here." She paused, gathering her courage. "With you." Quentin's expression softened. "I've never been good with words, Naomi, but having you and Emma here, it's made this place feel like a real home for the first time." "Quentin," she whispered. "Are you saying—" "I'm saying I care for you both," he interrupted, his voice rough with emotion. "More than I thought possible. I know it hasn't been that long, and you've been through so much. I don't want to rush you, but I wanted you to know." Naomi stepped closer, placing her hand on his chest. "I care for you too. Emma adores you, the way you are with her. It's everything I ever hoped for her." Quentin covered her hand with his own. "May I court you properly, Naomi Reeves?" She smiled up at him. "I'd like that very much." Their courtship was respectful but fervent. Quentin brought Naomi wildflowers from his rides around the property. She knitted him a scarf for the cooling evenings. They took Emma for walks to the creek that ran through the western edge of the ranch, teaching her the names of birds and plants. The townsfolk noticed the change. Martha Wilson winked knowingly at Naomi when she came to collect finished garments. "That Quentin James is a good man," she commented. "Stubborn as a mule sometimes, but solid gold underneath." "He is," Naomi agreed, unable to hide her happiness. "You deserve some joy after what you've been through," Martha said kindly. "Both of you do." October brought cooler temperatures and a visit from the circuit preacher. After Sunday services held in the Wilsons' large front room, Quentin asked Naomi to take a walk with him. Emma was happily being fussed over by the women of the congregation, so Naomi accepted, curious about his serious expression. They strolled to a small hill overlooking the town, where Quentin spread his coat on the ground for her to sit. "I've been thinking," he began, pacing nervously, "about the future. Our future." Naomi watched him, her heart racing. And he stopped, turning to face her. I love you, Naomi. You and Emma have brought light back into my life when I thought I'd never find it again. I know it hasn't been that long, but I'm sure of what I feel. I love you too, she said softly. You saved us, in every way possible. Quentin knelt before her, taking her hands in his. I don't have much to offer besides my ranch and my heart. But both are yours, if you'll have them. He took a deep breath. Will you marry me, Naomi? Will you let me be a father to Emma? Tears sprang to her eyes as she nodded. Yes, Quentin. Yes to both. His smile was radiant as he pulled her into his arms, kissing her with all the tenderness and passion he'd held back for so long. When they finally parted, breathless, he pressed his forehead to hers. I promise you'll never be alone again, he whispered. Either of you. Their wedding was held the following month, a simple ceremony in the same room where they'd met the preacher. Emma, now walking confidently, toddled down the makeshift aisle ahead of her mother, scattering wildflower petals and babbling happily. The entire town turned out for the celebration, which spilled onto the street as neighbors brought food and drink to share. Quentin had worked tirelessly to prepare for their new life together, adding the promised rooms to the house and buying a proper crib for Emma. Naomi had sewn her own wedding dress, a simple cream-colored gown that made Quentin's eyes widen appreciatively when he saw her. As they danced under the stars that night, Naomi laid her head on her husband's chest. Thank you, she murmured. For what? He asked, holding her close. For finding us that day? For everything since. Finding you was the best thing that ever happened to me, he replied. Both of you. Later, after the guests had departed and Emma was asleep, they stood together in their bedroom, suddenly shy despite the months of growing closeness. Are you happy, Mrs. James? Quentin asked, using her new name for the first time. Happier than I ever imagined possible, she answered truthfully, stepping into his embrace. I never thought I would find love like this. Nor I, he admitted, brushing her hair back from her face. After the war, after losing my family, I thought I would live and die alone on this ranch. We found each other, she said simply, reaching up to touch his face. All three of us. Their kiss deepened, and the last barriers between them fell away as they discovered each other fully for the first time. The years that followed were not without challenges. Drought threatened the ranch in their second year of marriage. A harsh winter the next year claimed several cattle. But through it all, their love and determination saw them through. Emma grew from a toddler into a spirited young girl, the spitting image of her mother, but with a stubborn streak that Quentin claimed came from neither of them. She followed him around the ranch, eager to learn everything about horses and cattle. By the time she was 5, she could ride her own pony and help with simple chores. Naomi's sewing business thrived as Willow Creek expanded. The railroad reached them in 1885, bringing new residents and opportunities. She opened a proper shop in town, taking on an apprentice, a young girl named Clara who showed exceptional talent with a needle. And in their third year of marriage, Naomi gave birth to a son they named Thomas, after Quentin's father. Emma took to her role as big sister with enthusiasm, if occasionally excessive bossiness. 2 years later, a daughter named Sarah joined their family, completing their happiness. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching their children play in the yard, Naomi turned to Quentin. Do you ever think about that day? When you found Emma and me under that mesquite tree? Quentin nodded, his arm tightening around her shoulders. More often than you might think. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I decided to take the northern trail that day instead. I believe we would have found each other somehow, she said. Some things are meant to be. He smiled, the lines around his eyes deeper now, but still crinkling with genuine joy. I think you're right. He looked out at their children, Emma teaching little Sarah how to make a daisy chain, while Thomas tried to catch grasshoppers nearby. I wouldn't change a thing about our story. Nor would I, Naomi agreed. Even the hard parts led us here. As the sun set over their land, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, Quentin kissed his wife's temple. You know, I meant what I said that first day. You'll never cry alone again. I know, she replied, leaning into his embrace. That's a promise you've kept every single day. Their life together continued to unfold against the backdrop of a changing West. Willow Creek grew into a proper town with a school, where Emma excelled, and eventually became a teacher herself. Thomas took to ranching like his father, expanding their holdings and introducing modern methods. Sarah inherited her mother's talent with a needle and eventually took over the shop in town. Quentin and Naomi grew older together, weathering the inevitable sorrows and celebrating the joys that life brought their way. They welcomed grandchildren, survived another war that took young men from their community, and watched as automobiles gradually replaced horses on Willow Creek's Main Street. Through it all, they remained each other's strength and comfort, the love that began beneath a mesquite tree deepening with each passing year. Every anniversary, Quentin would bring Naomi wildflowers and whisper the words that had changed both their lives. "You'll never cry alone again." And she never did. On their 40th wedding anniversary, the entire town gathered to celebrate them. Emma, now a respected schoolteacher with children of her own, stood to toast her parents. "Many of you know the story of how my mother and I came to Willow Creek," she began, her voice strong and clear. "Left in the dust of the desert by a man not worth naming. But what you might not know is that the man who found us, my father, in every way that matters, made a promise that day that he has kept faithfully for 40 years. He promised that we would never cry alone again." She raised her glass to Quentin, whose eyes shone with unshed tears. "Thank you, Pa, for keeping that promise. For showing me what a real man, a real father, looks like. For loving my mother the way she deserves to be loved. And for giving me the greatest gift a child could ask for, a family built on love and respect." Quentin rose shakily to his feet, his joints now stiff with age, and embraced his daughter. "Loving you both has been the easiest thing I've ever done," he said simply. Later that night, as they lay in the same bedroom they had shared for 4 decades, Naomi took Quentin's weathered hand in hers. "Do you remember what you told me on our wedding night?" she asked. "That I would love you until my dying breath?" He replied with a smile. And that finding us was the best thing that ever happened to you." "Still true," he said, pulling her close. "Every word. Even when I was stubborn about moving the furniture, or when I made you teach all 3 children to read because I didn't have the patience." He chuckled, the sound rumbling in his chest beneath her ear. "Even then, especially then." Naomi smiled in the darkness. "I never thought I could be this happy. That day in the desert, I was ready to die. I thought it was the end of everything. Instead, it was just the beginning." Quentin murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "The beginning of the best life I could have imagined." As they drifted to sleep in each other's arms, Naomi reflected on the journey that had brought them here, from desperation to joy, from abandonment to belonging. The girl who had been left in the dust with her crying baby had found not just rescue, but a love that had sustained her through decades. And through all those years, through every triumph and trial, the promise made by a kind-hearted cowboy had held true. She had never cried alone again.